Sure.
Yum, yum. It's time for a tasty and refreshing snack.
You know who I can do without? I can do without the people in the video store.
Which ones?
All of them. They never rent quality flicks. They always pick the most intellectually devoid movie on the racks.
And now, on with the show.
There is something in the streets, something in the shadows, something in the dark. Kill.
You think a cop did this?
Why not?
You automatically assume that it was a police officer instead of some lunatic son of a bitch dressed up like a cop.
He didn't kill the girl. He wanted a witness. He'll kill again. He enjoys killing.
He strikes without cause, without mercy.
Who's he killing? Pushers? Hustlers?
Innocent people.
Maniac Cop?
You may be getting information from inside the department.
That means he is one of us.
When the killer is a cop, there's danger in every bag, suspicion in every uniform. When a cop turns killer, no one is safe.
See a cop, you crossed to the other side of the street.
He'll find you wherever you are. He'll destroy you, whoever you are. Reason cannot stop him. Bullets cannot kill him. This is one maniac you'll have to face alone or die. The choice is yours. You can fight him. Remain silent forever. Starring Bruce Campbell from Evil Dead. Maniac Cop.
Hey guys, what's going on? You're listening to ThisWeekInGeek.net's Loose Cannon, where we open the Twig video store of yesteryear. It could be forgotten DVDs, forgotten VHS. We've even talked Betamax on this show. I am one of your video store clerks. I'm Mike the Birdman. But once again, I bring in the District Regional Manor, David Louis Denoyer, Esquire, Pablo Escobar. First of his name, I don't know. I kind of ran out of steam. But we welcome Dave back to the show.
You and Enrique are in a contest right now on how long my name can go, and I'm loving it.
So yes, guys, we have been taking spooky season to 11 here on This Week in Geek, and it's been really awesome having Dave here on the show. Dave is one of the co-hosts over at Welcome to Primetime, a Freddy's Nightmares podcast, which is nearing the end of its run.
It is indeed, and we have a great interview dropping on Halloween Day that is going to be with Mick Strawn, the production designer on the series, and we just recorded that a couple days ago, and it was an absolute blast, and I cannot wait for people to hear. Man's got stories, and he didn't really want to talk about Freddy's Nightmares very much, but he was an amazing guest.
That's really cool. Just the fact that you guys kept that going for so long. I was actually recommending you on Twitter to another person who runs another podcast. I'm like, hey, you should talk to Enrique and Dave. They'd probably, love to talk to you once the actor strike is over. So hopefully you'll get some more guests because don't leave me, guys. I need you guys on Monday mornings.
We are working on it.
You're as important as a morning cup of coffee.
We are absolutely working on it.
So we are back here at the Twig video store. We got some really interesting movies to talk about this week. And this is a series that I remember at the time being on cable television, on HBO and Cinemax. And I think this was on USA, Up All Night, a fair chunk. Mm-hmm. And it's the Maniac Cop series. And this is a series I think people know by name, and they loosely know it being associated with Bruce Campbell.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of people don't remember this series. So one of the things we do to talk about these movies is we often talk about our first memories of these. And unfortunately for me, these memories for me do not go back very far outside of, I remember when my parents had this giant satellite dish, and I've talked about this on the show a number of times. I remember the first two movies being on satellite television a fair chunk in the late 80s and early 90s, kind of growing up randomly while I was surfing the transponder channels. That's how old I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't recall much about them up until maybe going to high school. So I remember I remember one of my girlfriends, we were going through the video store looking for something to rent one day, and I seem to recall the cover to the Maniac Cop series VHS more than I remember the actual movie, because it had this really bright red font on it, very, very distinctive. I seem to recall the makeup for the actor Robert Zadar as Cordell being really prominent on a poster or something in the video store, but I just kept passing over it because the name sounds frankly friggin' goofy. And I just had no idea what these movies were about up until very, very, very recently, when I actually had a chance to watch all three this past week. But I knew about them via the In Search of Darkness documentaries that David Weiner did a couple of years ago. He's doing one on the 90s horror movies right now.
Yeah, no, he absolutely did. I saw Pennywise is peeking in there, and I'm a big Pennywise fan, so I was like, damn it.
It's gonna be a good documentary, but I found out by watching those In Search of Darkness, it really opened my eyes to wanting to explore more of the horror that wasn't just the big franchise. And I felt like Maniac Cop was positioned in the way they wanted to create the next kind of franchisable character.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't going to be a Jason or a Freddy. It's just not. It's not even as recognizable as Pumpkinhead. It's just Maniac Cop. But no, I bet you, unless you're like a diehard horror nut, I'm going to guess out of 10 people, maybe one knows the name of the character, but I'm guessing a large number of them know the name of the series, Maniac Cop. So, like I said, that's kind of where my thing stops and ends with this series. So I understand, though, Dave, your experience with the Maniac Cop series is significantly more in-depth.
Yeah, I would absolutely say that. These films have been in my life a decade, maybe. So we're talking 10 years is when I discovered them. And I remember distinctly when I first got my hands on Maniac Cop 1 was in college. I had gone to, I believe it was Horror Hound when I was living in the Cincinnati area and going to college in Mason. Horror Hound Cincinnati was like a 15-20 minute drive from us whenever they came in, which was, I think, like twice a year at that point. And we would go if we had the time and whatnot. And I remember distinctly one year I ended up grabbing a copy of Synapse's release at the time on DVD of Maniac Cop. And I remember watching it and it being like, oh yeah, that's cool. But like for the most part, it was pretty forgettable, in my opinion, even though, we'll go into the ifs and everything's about it. Cause like you said, I have in-depth research on this, having just a love for these movies, but also watching the special features on the disc that I have. But, watched it and I was like, yeah, it was good, but like for the most part, it was pretty forgettable. Fast forward about 2-3 years later, which I think it was like 2013, if I remember correctly, Blue Underground officially got the rights back to release 2 and 3, which for the most part had been widely unavailable, except for like, maybe a crappy DVD here of 3 and, etc. You know how the market is and how that stuff goes, like multiple releases, but, not one that's decent. So I was working at FYE at the time. I think this had to be at Suncoast, because Suncoast is where we especially got those releases that I'd always loved to look out for. And I was just doing stock one day and putting them away, and I was like, it was like Maniac Cop 2 and 3. I'm like, well, shit, I have the DVD at home, so I'll grab 2 and 3, and I'll watch them this weekend. And I remember popping the other ones on and just being like, oh my God, like this series is pure insanity. And to understand Maniac Cop and my first rendition with it in regards of my experience with both the film and also getting to eventually see the sequels, Maniac Cop comes from Larry Cohen, who is the writer of such films as The Stuff, Q the Winged Serpent, and so many more, It's Alive, etc. Larry Cohen was a really good writer, but he could write fast and he could write stuff that got made for the most part. They were very big releases for video. Bill Lustig is the director of this film, and Bill Lustig is the guy who directed Maniac with Joe Spinell in 1980, Vigilante, Relentless series. I mean, Uncle Sam, he's got a pretty good resume too, and he's also done a lot of work in the industry as well. And Maniac Cop came from a lunch that Larry and Bill had one day, and Larry was like, you know, Bill, why haven't I done a sequel yet? Like, why haven't you let me write like a sequel to Maniac? And he's like, well, Larry, I think everything was said with the first Maniac, so there's not really anything. He's like, well, what about Maniac Cop? You have the right to remain silent forever. And he's like, holy shit. He's like, well, you definitely have something there. We could sell a whole movie off that title and that tagline alone. So they decided to do it. Well, they didn't exactly have the money yet. So they actually went out, and the parade footage that it is the scene with Bruce Campbell and the Maniac Cop where he's chasing him through the parade, Birdman, that was the first thing they shot ever before there was even a script. So that scene is what they sold the movie on because it had the impressive parade footage in it and everything. So they took that to, I believe, Lustig's Japanese investors and showed it, you know, with like, we've got Bruce Campbell and blah, 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 which I don't even know if Campbell was really a big name at that point, to be honest. But it's hilarious to me because it's like, okay, so you made a movie without a script being made and you started filming it. And it's amazing when you watch a lot of these special features. That's exactly how this happens a lot. Like people will pitch an idea and they'll be like, okay, yeah, we totally want to make that. Well, we need to get the money. Well, how do we get the money? Well, let's just put a promo of it together. I mean, it's the same thing with trailers. Even though trailers are typically cut after the film, it was just kind of interesting because it's like, oh, you know, that totally makes sense. Maniac Cop, and then now 2, 3 come out, you know, later, and of course. And yeah, I completely understand. You told me that you weren't the biggest fan of the series, but you have to admit the titles alone and what you get, you're not getting ripped off.
Yeah, like what you were just kind of saying there, it's very much the canon film school. Like, hey, we have a cool idea, we have a tagline, we don't have a script yet, but don't worry about it, we'll find that money. And here, I'd say the most interesting thing about Maniac Cop, it's the premise, the setup, and the story. But what you're getting is you have components of the first movie I really like. Like, there are parts of it where, yeah, as you mentioned, it's a little slow, it's a little boring.
Yeah.
But there are parts of it where you're like, okay, this is really, 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 really good. And then there are parts that are just kind of forgettable and bleh. And that's something I noticed across all 3 movies, is there are moments in these that are really, really cool. And there are moments where you're just kind of looking at your watch, waiting for this thing to end. And I feel that's such a tragedy, but it's very much of the era in the late 1980s and the 1990s where it was that direct-to-video sequel. Let's just get something out the door. Let's get something in print to make it happen. And as we were discussing off air, it seems to be that when Larry Cohen and Lustig put this together, they wanted a franchisable idea. They had kind of a character in the Maniac Cop himself, who, when you do the summary here, is a character named Cordell. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting makeup look. They got a really good actor who could portray the physicality of it, but he's not a Kane Hodder. He's not a Douglas Bradley. He's not a Robert Englund. He's memorable, but he's not at the same time. It's a cool character in a forgettable movie, which is like the idea behind these. So Dave, why don't you do a very quick elevator pitch about the movie? Because I really want to talk about the story, because I love the idea behind this.
Yeah, no worries. So 1988 Maniac Cop. This is, like I said, directed by Bill Lustig and written by Larry Cohen. Now, the acting machismo stars that we have in this movie include Tom Atkins, Bruce Campbell, William Smith, Richard Roundtree, R.I.P. Actually, he like recently just left us
today as of this recording. Yeah.
And it's incredible that the as you go through the films, the same thing happens with the acting pool they have. It just kind of increases. and get some really impressive names in there, which we'll get to, of course, as we get to the sequels. But anyway, so Maniac Cop is the story of Matt Cordell, who is a police officer in the 80s in New York, and he is a good cop, and people know him by name. He's a pretty stand-up guy. He ends up finding out that there's some corruption going on at City Hall, and he's sent to, is it Sing Sing that he is sent to? I can't remember. Yeah. He is sent to Sing Sing to basically take the fall. So they set him up, the politicians set him up, and he's sent to Sing Sing to take the fall. This gang attacks him, slices him up, kills him, and then fast forward about 3 years later, there's some murders happening in New York, and you have a cop that is doing them that nobody knows because this is the Maniac Cop, and he has come back for vengeance. And I mean, that's basically it. That's the synopsis. Now, what is great about a Larry Cohen script is you're going to get extra things with that every time. So you have Bruce Campbell, you have Tom Atkins, you have, like I said, William Smith and Richard Roundtree, which are all cops in the film. And it just becomes a mystery that you solve and then you stay for a horror film slasher that is at the tail end of the slasher period, mind you, too.
Yeah, the thing that I loved about this is it's kind of a police procedural mystery through most of it. Yeah, you do they start to get into the supernatural stuff towards the last, 30 minutes of it.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's like a whodunit. How is this leading to where it goes? And most of the movie follows Tom Atkins, who my first experience with Tom Atkins was Night of the Creeps. And then I saw him in Halloween 3.
Halloween 3 and Lethal Weapon are my two.
And then I recently watched The Fog the other night, first time, by the way. And I'm like, I really enjoyed Tom Atkins. And Tom Atkins holds Maniac Cop together. And Larry Cohen pulls a swerve on me when they killed him.
Yeah.
Like, Cordell throws him out a window, and I'm like, oh my God. And I was thinking, wow, I did not see that coming. And I really appreciate that about this movie, because when they killed Tom Atkins, I'm thinking, okay, nobody's safe now.
Yeah.
I don't know how this is going to go.
Well, and I think also what's great about it is to set up his character a little bit for the listeners. Atkins is a cop that is working at the station and everything that Campbell works in. Campbell's a cop that's having an affair. And it turns out that halfway through the movie, you find out that Maniac Cop has a love interest that is feeding him information from the inside of the department. So she makes it so that Campbell gets set up for these Maniac Cop killings because she calls his wife as he's leaving to go have his affair, tells him to follow him because he's the killer. She catches them in the act, and that's when Campbell's like, I didn't want you to find out like this. Fast forward, she gets killed by the Maniac Cop. She gets yanked off the street into a van and then gets placed at the hotel where she busted them. Campbell goes down for it, and then clearly he must be the Maniac Cop, so he's out of the way now. So Atkins knows that Campbell is innocent, or at least believes that he is, so he decides to get into the case, finds out about Maniac Cop's love interest, and then is part of this amazing siege at the prison, which not only happens in one film, but also two, which we'll get into. But a siege on a prison that leaves a bunch of dead bodies helps Campbell escape, and in the escape, Tom Atkins gets literally thrown through a fucking window, lands on a cop car, and that's the end of Atkins with 30 minutes of movie still left.
Yeah, and at the time, this is not the first shootout or brutality at a police station that I can recall in my film history. I remember the Terminator from 84, Assault on Precinct 13, and other movies like that. And I was going to say, okay, that's pretty cool. Because I remember in the 80s, either cops were either super dirty or they were superheroes. There was very little in between. And here I can't think of many cops that were involved in a horror movie that weren't just goofy kind of one-note characters. These characters felt like they had a dimension to them. I'm trying to think of memorable police characters in horror movies from around this time. Only one I can think of is, honestly, I liked Sheriff Garris from Friday the 13th Part 6.
Yeah, he's pretty good.
But here, like I said, we are getting something a little bit different. And this is Bruce Campbell not being Ash either. This is him doing something a little bit kind of different. And that's the thing, though. Like, when it comes to me and Bruce Campbell, I've seen the Evil Dead movies, of course. Bubba Hotep, which I love, and we should really talk about that.
Great movie.
And I'd seen maybe one or two other things where he plays like a bit part. I remember him being in a movie where he played yet another cop, but I think he was like a SWAT team member during like a zombie apocalypse or something.
Yeah, well, I mean, and to give perspective on his career at this point, so Maniac Cop is, like I said, 1988. Evil Dead 2 is 87. So by this point, he's been in Raimi's couple flicks of Crime Wave, Thou Shalt Not Kill Except, Evil Dead 2, and The Evil Dead. Maniac Cop follows one of my favorites, which is 1989's Intruder, a really good slasher film. I say really good, but it's passable, but I love it. It's a lot of fun. Intruder, that has Danny Hicks in it from Evil Dead 2. It's also has Raimi's in it. It's one of those movies that I think honestly is starting to get a little bit more appreciation, but I digress. So he really has only done like Evil Dead 2 and the other Raimi flicks at this point. So he's known for that, but not to the point where I think people would really come to recognize him, where like people actually see him at the end of Darkman in the Bruce Campbell mask that Liam Neeson's character wears. So Campbell really was not new on the scene, but he was fresh because Evil Dead 2 had just happened. So he comes off that and does Maniac Cop. And you said it perfectly. It's a complete detour from the Ashley character, which in this case, I think really works for him, which is why it's so interesting what they do in part 2, which we'll get to when we get to. But like Campbell is one of those characters in this that it's like, I forget he's in it because to me, he's just an everyman in this. He's not Bruce Campbell. He's just that guy.
Yeah, like he's that side character, and when he becomes the main character with him and the other officer Mallory, I think her name is.
Yeah, Teresa Mallory.
Yeah, and they become trying to survive against Cordell's assault. Again, it's him doing something that is against type, and I really appreciate it. And I did my own little bit of research on this, and I found out at the time, Bruce Campbell was going through an incredibly messy divorce at the time.
Oh, yeah, he was.
So evidently, when fans would ask him about this, he would either brush them off or you'd get some of that Bruce Campbell razor wit. So people would go to conventions. Yeah. They would bring up Maniac Cop just to see if they would get the honor of being zinged by him, which is kind of a dick move. I mean, don't dig fresh wounds into somebody. I mean, if they went through a divorce, don't be that guy. Yeah. But it seems, I guess, Bruce has had a remarkable sense of humor about his life, and fans are going to be fans, but
absolutely. And I think honestly, he is one of those actors that I feel like for a while there, I've never really heard like a full-on bad word about Bruce Campbell like I have Tom Savini in his period where he was having some rough times. But at the same time, it's like anytime I go to conventions and I have a bad experience with a celebrity, I just think that these are people too, and they can have bad days. We may not see what's going on. So it's like with Campbell, it's like, same thing with anybody that you love the piece of work they did, whether it's music, whether it's movie, whether it's TV, you don't know what they were going through. So what may be a very positive experience or just something fun that you hold on to may not have the same thing for them. But what does usually turn their mood around, not always, but for a good amount of time, is if you express your joy that you got from it. There's some that'll be a little still sour about it, but for the most part, people love when you love their art.
Yeah, and one of the people that I found out they passed away a number of years ago, but the guy who plays Cordell, Richard Zadar, was a regular.
Yeah. Or Robert Zadar.
Robert Zadar, was a regular on the horror convention scene, and it seemed from all accounts that I could find, he was very willing to talk about it, but he just started to develop a lot of health issues towards the end of his life, and he wasn't able to do as much as he wanted to. He was born with a genetic disorder called cherubism, I think it is, which gave him a very pronounced jawline.
Yeah.
But that really assisted with the portrayal of this horror movie character. And the thing is, the makeup didn't need to be like Rob Botine levels of fucked up. It's simple, it's effective. It's essentially a zombie makeup, and I think it's the best in the first one because it's not so over the top. You're getting a lot of the expression when the camera is on him, and that's something else I noticed about the first movie too. It doesn't need to shove the supernatural in your face for it to be effective in that regard, but in the sequels, which we will get to, you do see more of the character, and there's always that line in film school, the less you show the monster the better, unless you can really show the monster. Here, the Maniac Cop series, as it goes on, uses the monster more and more, some more effective than others, but I feel it's the best in the first one. I think the first one is probably the most entertaining as a self-contained movie. The reason I say that is Tom Atkins, again, steals the show. Bruce Campbell acting against type, and you get a really good story. Now, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of these movies as a whole, but the first one I liked the most.
Yeah.
When we get into the second and third ones, I recall Maniac Cop 2 being everywhere in my very early childhood. Again, on Cinemax, on HBO, on USA Up All Night. I seem to recall my video store, even my local shitty one in my hometown, having a copy of Maniac Cop 2, because that was a direct-to-video sequel that evidently did some real kind of numbers for the distributor, despite not being a massive success, because the first one was made on like a budget of like 1.1 million. It only grossed like over $600,000, so not a financial success by any stretch of the imagination. But according to the Wikipedia article, whether you want to believe that or not, people are rediscovering this movie now, saying it's a huge cult film, and I can't disagree with that. But with the second one, I just seem to recall a weird bit of oversaturation, or at least that's how I perceived it at the time. And again, it's just got one of those titles where it seems like it would be made up on Family Guy or The Simpsons as a throwaway gag.
Yeah.
It seems so ridiculous.
No, it absolutely does. And I think, honestly, going back to Maniac Cop 1, what makes Maniac Cop work so well is that it's a really simple but effective horror thriller. Because even from the opening titles, you get to see Cordell getting dressed out basically to go out and kill somebody. And while they do it, they play what is the Maniac Cop theme for the first two movies, which is this lullaby from hell-esque, only like, what would you say, Birdman? Like a minute and a half repeat that they really get their money out of, because anytime you hear that, you start getting creeped out. So you almost have like a Michael Myers thing with him a little bit, because you have the music that kind of gives you a tune, or even Jaws for that matter. So they give you the tune like to let you know when Maniac Cop's around. The kills stack up really quick in the first one, but compared to the rest of the series, they're pretty fine. I mean, I will say I always love the kill when the two teens get pulled over that are drinking in the car, and he has the guy come out of the car, which Cordell does not say a single word until movie 2. We never hear Cordell talk. We hear him like grunt a couple times, or like growl, I guess you can call it, but we never hear him talk until movie 2. But in this scene, he pulls two kids over, they're drinking at a stoplight, has the guy get out of the car, and the only time he does it is the only way he does it is he keeps motioning him with his finger, like, hey, come here, and then guides him with the nightstick out. Well, this nightstick has a knife in it that is at least 6-7 inches long, if not longer. Easily. It is a huge blade, and he slashes this kid twice across the throat, throws him on top of the chick's car, or on his car, and then the chick is just watching her boyfriend's blood drip all over the windshield that he's just smashed through. She turns on the wipers, and the wipers are just wiping the blood, which I've always loved that aesthetic. And that's one thing that I can say about all three films. They are really well shot.
Yeah, like my favorite shot in honestly the entire series. To go back to the opening of the movie, it's just the way where he's slowly dressing. He's
Getting
doing
dressed.
up his shirt. He's doing the buttons up. And I'm just noticing, at least on the copy of the movie I watched, it's the little details you pick up. Like you can notice the fine fuzzy detail of the cotton gloves, him loading the speed loader of the bullets into his belt, which, again, that's something I've never seen before. I've never seen a police uniform with a 6-shooter speed loader before. I'm just used to cops in my area always carrying automatics with the ammo belts kind of that way. So that was unique to me. And just, it builds up a slow menace. There are very few shots in this movie that feel wasted or needless. You're right. It's remarkably well shot. It looks great. And when you do see the monster, it looks fantastic.
Absolutely.
So,
and I think that has to do with the fact that the cinematographer on this, just to give you a little industry info, because I was so curious last night when I was revisiting 2, I was like, man, who shot it? And it turns out it's the same guy that shot the first and the second is James Lemo, I want to say. Give me a second here. I got to make sure I'm on the right guy because there's two listed and there wasn't on my phone last night. Okay, no, this is the right guy. So James Lemo is his name, and this gentleman was the cinematographer on Miss 45, the Abel Ferrara movie in 1981, Madman in 1981, Vigilante, the William Lustig Vigilante film from 1982, Fear City, Maniac Cop, Relentless, another Bill Lustig, Maniac Cop 2, and one that you, me, and Enrique will have to discuss possibly because this is one of our all-time favorite films that kind of started our friendship, called Dangerous Touch, which is essentially Lou Diamond Phillips did a crime film that he directed in 1994 that's also like a cross with 50 Shades.
Huh.
It's
That's
super
weird.
interesting and amazing, and I digress. Anyway, so James Lemo is the cinematographer on this film. That also goes into the fact that what he puts on camera, everybody in this film is so fucking charismatic. I mean, the scenes, just the simple dialogue scenes. There's one of Atkins and William Smith, the other, the squad leader, in the bar, and there's that whole line where he's like, what are you, a fucking cop? He's like, fucking A, I'm a cop. Why don't you go be a cop? And it's just like, it's two guys palling around together, and it's so fun because the charisma that these people have in this movie alone is just really fun to watch. And that's why when the real body count starts happening and you start losing these characters, it's kind of heartbreaking for some. But for the most part, like I said, I think Maniac Cop is fine. The plot's a bit of a mess. There's a lot to like that sets up the story that's going to carry us to the next 2 and third film. And it's got amazing stunts, just like the second and the third one have, which again, we'll get into. But for the most part, I think it's just a fine slasher because people really don't care about the story of this one once they realize that it's a cop and he's killing people. That's all they need. So when they unveil this whole thing of, well, Cordell was communicating with this chick inside the department, that whole middle to me slows the movie down.
Yes,
and
100%.
That's why it's probably, honestly, Birdman, this is probably my least favorite of the series, which is, I feel like, sacrilegious to say, but I'll get into it with 2 and 3 because, like I said, I just have so much information and just a love for those movies. But I really like Maniac Cop, and I appreciate Maniac Cop, but I dropped it from 4 stars on Letterboxd to 3.5 on this viewing, and I gave Maniac Cop 5 stars, and I'm not sorry about it.
Yeah, like, I think my final recommendation for Maniac Cop 1, I like it because it has a very interesting concept, some great performances. It's a little subtle when it needs to be. It does drag out in places, but it's ultimately not a bad slasher flick. It's definitely one of those undiscovered gems I think people are starting to discover now because of documentaries like In Search of Darkness. And when you find out any number of like video YouTubers or essayists who will probably talk about it, and us here on this podcast, it's worth checking out. Now, as of right now, where is this currently streaming, or is it streaming?
So I watched it on Peacock because Allie, my partner, we were settling in, and I was like, well, I got to watch Maniac Cop for the podcast, and I went to get my Synapse Blu-ray, and unfortunately, it didn't have captions because my girlfriend is deaf. So I watched it on Peacock, and that's where they have it right now available. I think, honestly, that is the only place it's like available to watch for free, except for... Oh, no, I'm wrong. Okay. No, it's actually everywhere right now. Maniac Cop is one of those. It's on Freevee, Peacock, Plex, Pluto, and Tubi. So it's available. I think it might even be on Shudder. I can't remember.
Oh, wow. So, folks, I guess, yeah, you have no reason to not track this down.
Absolutely.
So Maniac Cop 2, initial thoughts watching it, I was kind of surprised, again, who died and when. I was like, okay, we're going to pull another Larry Cohen here.
Yeah.
Which, again, kind of surprised me. And then the lead actor in this movie, what's his name again?
The lead actor is Robert Davi.
And I remember this guy from a very unusual place, not from anything he's actually done on film.
Oh, wow.
I remember him from a bus terminal. You might be thinking, Mike, what the fuck are you talking about? Well, the one time I was stuck in Ohio, I was taking a bus trip a number of years ago, and it was like death o'clock in the morning at this Greyhound terminal. And Fox News is playing in this bus terminal. I'm like, all right, fine. I got nothing else to do, and my Walkman's dead. And he's on this political show. We're not going to get into his politics, but I was like,
I'm aware.
This guy looks really familiar. And while I was watching Maniac Cop 2, I was like, hey, you're that douchebag from the bus station. And yeah, so that was a good time. I hear he's a frequent guest on Fox's Red Eye, I think it was. But yeah, I seem to recall this guy's face. And that's the thing too. He has such a distinctive look to him where I was like, I'm pretty sure he did a movie. There's a guy actually, Dave, very quickly look this up. Did he ever do any movies with a director named Frank D'Angelo?
Frank D'Angelo, I think I know that name.
Let
me check.
You do. He's a litigious individual, and we won't say more than that because Birdman does not have the money to fight legal battles.
Fair enough. Let me check this.
But yeah, so I was like, there's something about this actor's mannerisms where he's almost cartoonishly
Sicilian Vampire.
Yes,
from 2015.
That's a movie I dare you and Hen to watch and have a drinking game with it, is all I will say.
I'll keep that in mind.
So yeah, again, watching this movie, I thought some of the kills were ridiculous.
Oh yeah.
I found out some very tragic circumstances involving one of the stunts in this movie. So I'm going to throw this to you for info dump, and then we will talk about this.
All right, so we are discussing Maniac Cop 2, 1990, once again directed by William Lustig and written by Larry Cohen. This film stars Robert Davi, Claudia Christian, Michael Lerner, William Clarence Williams III, my God, I can't talk. Of course, Robert Zadar, Theo Rossi, Paula Trickey, Charles Napier, Robert Earl Jones. I mean, this is one of those movies, again, with a stacked cast, which we'll get into here in a second. But Maniac Cop 2... Spoilers, to give you the full description of Maniac Cop 2, I have to give you the ending of Maniac Cop 1. They don't get the Maniac Cop. So he kidnaps Bruce Campbell, has an amazing stunt with a truck off a dock, and a pipe goes into him as he's trying to go off the dock, and he pins him. The rest of the van goes in, and they can't find the body. At the end of Maniac Cop, his hand comes up out of the water, giving you the idea that he's still alive. So Maniac Cop 2 happens, and essentially we are... I think about a year or so, I think it's 8 months actually, 8 months after the events of Maniac Cop, no killings have happened, and then all of a sudden there happens to be this appearance of the Maniac Cop one night as Marco Rodriguez, the same robber from Cobra, is holding up a convenience store, and he is drugged out of his mind. He has the owner of the shop open some lottery tickets, and he finds a $20,000 scratch-off. Just when he turns around, which, tell me if I'm wrong, Birdman, does this not feel like a big ripoff of RoboCop with this opening?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking that last night. I'm thinking, this seems very reminiscent of that. Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.
Exactly. So in typical non-RoboCop fashion, he shoots the clerk that has the lottery ticket, hands the smoking shotgun back to Marco Rodriguez's character, and Rodriguez grabs the lottery ticket. He goes out front, and cops are swarming the place. They're like, drop the gun. He's like, wait. He's like, it was one of you. And they blow him away, and that begins the opening of Maniac Cop 2. Way more insane, way more intense than the first one, and that is exactly what this movie sets up. Because, long story short, Bruce Campbell's character and Lorraine Landon, who was Teresa Mallory, who is the cop he's having the affair with in the first movie, they get killed by Maniac Cop. And Robert Davi is a cop that is assigned to basically give clearance on Campbell and Teresa Landon being able to join the force with the help of the psychiatrist that's played like Claudia Christensen. When their deaths happen, Christensen and Davi decide to team up to find out what's going on with Maniac Cop. Meanwhile, Maniac Cop befriends a serial killer that's living in New York, played by Theo Rossi, whose name is Turkel, and he is killing strippers and basically making a name for himself with this act because he's already claimed either 5 or 6. He befriends Maniac Cop when the Maniac Cop interrupts him, getting his 6th or 7th kill, and then basically takes him back to his lair. They share stories. The Maniac Cop decides, you know what, fuck these cops, I'm going to take them all down, and goes into the station, raids it, and more hijinks ensue. I want to keep spoiling, but in order to do that, we have to talk about this movie in depth with the action and the sequences that take place in it. So Birdman, take it away.
Yeah, like this sequence at the police station raid is probably one of the best parts of this movie. And it's, for me, it's the sheer brutality because Cordell takes he takes some guns from the range downstairs. Yeah. And he just starts walking through it, and he's like the Terminator, just more brutal. If you can imagine that, because when the T-800 had the shotguns and the machine gun, it was like brr, brr, and he was just efficient. Here he's like blam, 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 and he's just whacking people left, right, and center. But the thing that makes it more brutal than the Terminator, he's walking through glass doors. It's not stopping him, obviously, like it would, but it's just the fact it's like you are going to die. You're already dead. You just don't know it yet. It's so brutal.
Everything is stepped up to 11 because this movie had 3 times the budget of the original Maniac Cop. So on this amazing bonus feature of a making of on the disc that Blue Underground released, they have a 47-minute documentary that's the making of, and then on 3 they have a 27-minute documentary that is the making of as well. And so Maniac Cop 2 was made for 3 times the budget of the first. Davi was picked for this movie before he was even agreeing to be in it because Lustig had his meeting with the Japanese investors. He's walking up to their office and he sees the new poster for License to Kill, the Robert Davi James Bond film where he's the villain, on, I think he said Times Square. It was going up. So he goes to this meeting and they're like, well, we have this. And he's like, and we have Robert Davi. And they're like, oh, we love Robert Davi. So lo and behold, he calls Davi and he's like, you are essentially going to be a combination of like Humphrey Bogart meets Dr. Frankenstein. And he's like, really? He's like, that's a really interesting way to put that. So, okay, I'll do it. So he agrees to be in it. And Davi is what makes 2 and 3, in my opinion, because 2 and 3 go from straight up horror thrillers to action horror. This is guns a-blazing. Yeah, there's a lot of violence that is non-gun oriented, but this is an action movie with horror elements to it. And I think that's what I really love about 2 and 3. But 2 especially, the reason I gave it 5 stars on Letterboxd is because I had a fucking blast revisiting this, as I always do for the most part. But it's because 2 knows what it wants to do. Cohen wrote the sequel knowing exactly what he had in mind in regards to the story that Maniac Cop is back, and now that he's killed off Bruce Campbell, which Campbell gets knocked off reading a newspaper 7 to 10 minutes into the film. Like, he is first credited on this movie, like within the first 5 names listed in the credits, and he's gone before the 20-minute mark or at the 20-minute mark. Lori Landon luckily follows him a few minutes later, actually a little bit later, So she has more screen time because Landon was supposed to be in 3, which I'll get to when we start talking about 3. But Campbell is gone, and Davi is now our main character, but he's joined with the likes of Michael Lerner. He's joined with the likes of, like I said, Theo Rossi. And this cast, once again, just makes this movie work because it's a bunch of people you recognize, even if they're only in it for like a 5-minute role. Like Charles Napier is just a TV reporter guy that interviews both Michael Lerner and I believe Claudia Christensen's character. That's what basically awakens everybody to the Maniac Cop notice. But then you have Theo Rossi that's playing the serial killer, which, if anybody doesn't know the name Theo Rossi, he is Bud in Halloween 2, Amazing Grace Come Sit on My Face. He's also in the Relentless series. He also played the mayor's assistant in Maniac Cop 1, which I always find hilarious because I'm like, man, if this is in the same universe, hard times fell on Theo Rossi's character from that first movie in that 8 months. But Theo Rossi, or Leo Rossi, I keep calling him Theo. Leo Rossi plays Turkel, and he is a Charles Manson lookalike with dirty teeth and long hair, but he's a civilized serial killer in the remains of having a lair that is in a sewer, but he's got a bed, he's got pictures, he's got a microwave, he's got liquor. Like, he's got this place decked out with a door to where he has a hilarious line when they go to search his place. He's like, wipe your feet on the mat. Like, he has pride in his place, even though it's in a sewer. But he's also a terrifying guy in this movie as Turkel. He's introduced to us by watching this woman, the stripper at a club, and he actually went into that in the bonus features in regards to what he called his research for the role, if you can believe this. So he got into, like, this is like 3-4 days before they're shooting that scene. He got into his wardrobe, and at this point, 42nd Street was still the exact slime hole that it is in this movie. There's peep houses, there's strip shows, there's adult theaters and drugs and prostitutes everywhere. So he goes into a peep show. He puts his coins in. The thing goes up. The woman dances, and he decides, what would Turkel do? Well, he wouldn't take his eyes off her eyes the entire time. So the peep show window goes up, and he stares at this dancer. She keeps dancing. The window goes back down. He pops more coins in. It goes up one more time, and she's still dancing, and the whole time he's still looking directly at her eyes, making contact only with her eyes. The window goes down a second time. He pops the coins in. Nothing happens. 2 security guys surround him, lift him up, and throw him out to the street and tell him to never fucking come back. And he was like, I've got what Turkel's going to do. So when you watch that initial scene of his introduction in the strip club, that is exactly what he did to somebody supposedly on 42nd Street. And tell me that it is not the creepiest damn thing in that scene.
Yeah, like, again, I'm not the biggest fan of this movie, but the components that do work remarkably well. So I'm very pleased with his performance. Again, he's weirdly civilized and weirdly charming as this serial killer, and he's the only guy who treats Cordell with respect and reverence.
Gets him to actually say his only line in the movie.
Yeah, he's like, Cordell.
Yeah, because he literally asked him. He's like, hey, can you write? Like, if I give you a pen and paper, can you write? And at this point, they're in Leo Rossi's hideout, and so he goes to get it. And the whole time this scene is happening, which, going back to the cinematography again, Cordell is shot in this red light reflecting from the waters of the sewers around them, and it looks incredible. It looks kind of like emotion grabbing, and also just, he looks both creepy and sympathetic as hell in this scene as he goes to get these utensils for Cordell to write with, and Cordell opens his mouth and goes, Cordell. And he, like, embraces him. He's like, Cordell. He's like, I knew that was you. Like, because at this point, Maniac Cop's back in the news. But yeah, he's such an interesting character, even though he's a fucking monster. But he's also comic relief at times, because one of my all-time favorite lines is after he begins shooting up the police station, Cordell busts into this holding cell where Leo Rossi's been arrested at this point with the likes of Clarence Williams III, and I cannot remember the other guy that's in there with him. But he literally looks through the bars and he goes, "It must be visiting hours because my friend is here."
That's such a great line delivery too, and I would wonder how many times that got shot. But that was the take that won it. Now, one of the things to talk about Maniac Cop 2 is to talk a little bit of the behind the scenes, and unfortunately, there was a little bit of a tragedy with this movie. The actress who played the police psychologist, what's her name again?
Pollyea Christian. Yeah. So if you want me to give you a little background before you give that story, because I know exactly what story you're going into. So Pollyea Christian is playing the role of Susan Riley, and she is a psychiatrist that has been tasked with giving Lorene Landon and Bruce Campbell the go that they can return to the Force, because the Force is having them get psychological evaluation, because they want them to forget Maniac Cop existed. Because you find out in this movie that Michael Lerner's character, Edward Doyle, who is the head of the department, the head guy, he was behind the fact that Cordell was sent to Sing Sing, took the fall and all that stuff. And at one point, at the climax of the movie, he actually confesses that, which we'll get to. But anyway, Claudia Christensen's character decides at one point that she has to go protect Lorene Landon's character, Teresa Malley, because she found out Campbell's dead, and she knows that Cordell is moving in on those two because they're the only two remaining connections from the first movie, which is surprising is when, like I said, Campbell dies at the 20-minute mark, and then I think by about the half hour or 45-minute mark, this is when Lorene Landon dies. How her death occurs is what Birdman is about to tell you in regards to the tragedy. Is Cordell has sabotaged the vehicle that they're in to where they have to get out and change a tire. He kills the original cab driver. They steal the cab. Something happens to the cab where it crashes and rolls over, and they have to flee it. That's when Maniac Cop catches up to Lorene Landon. Claudia Christensen's character. It is Lorene Landon. He throws her through a window to get to Christensen, who he takes and handcuffs to a car. A car that he is about to throw down a hill. Now, at this point, you'd be thinking, well, naturally, a stunt person would do that. Yes, a stunt person did do that, but for a couple shots, they did not use a stunt person, and Claudia Christensen did her stunts, and Birdman, take it from here.
Yeah, so what had happened there was when she was being dragged by this car, when she's trying to get into the vehicle, and in those shots, she's being dragged along the side of the road. And unfortunately, at this time, she was a couple of weeks pregnant. Now, she did not disclose this to the production, and unfortunately, tragedy befell and the baby was lost. And there was some legal complications. Production shut down for a little while. And obviously the picture did get finished, but it's one of the reasons that I know about this movie is because of this particular incident, because I have a very big interest in stunts and stuff like that. And as me and Dave were talking about a couple of weeks ago when we talked about the Twilight Zone movie, safety on sets is so, so important. You have to talk to the producers, the directors, the stunt people, etc. And obviously with the tragedy that happened within the last year or so on the Alec Baldwin movie, Rust, it's just something that you have to be aware of. And, you see all the crazy stunts that, Keanu Reeves and Tom Cruise do in their movies. They're trained professionals. They have stunt doubles too, but mistakes can and do happen, as evidenced by the Russ incident. So yeah, that's the main reason I became interested in some of the behind the scenes of this movie, because I was like, how could this have happened? But the 90s were a different time when you made movies. And sometimes when you make a cheaper movie, quote unquote, sometimes stuff goes by the side. And when the actor wants to do something that they think they can do, they should be allowed to try it, but they need to be very honest with all the people involved and saying, hey, I am pregnant, I have this health condition, blah, 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 and they can assess the risk with the actor. And if it's not safe for so-and-so, they shouldn't do it. But that took me back, because I was like, wow, just this movie cost you more than what you thought it would, and that's a tragedy. But that is unfortunately the nature of Hollywood at this particular time.
It is, and I will say, too, that I did find it interesting because I saw that exact thing that you read, and I was like, well, clearly I forgot them talking about this in the documentary on the disc. It is not mentioned at all.
Yeah, like
And they talk to Claudia Christensen, and it is not mentioned one bit.
Yeah, I think I found this out from, I'm pretty sure it was In Search of Darkness 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Or it was another documentary I saw on like kind of YouTube. But yeah,
and the stunts are largely, absolutely on the back of Spiro Rosatos, who is the stunt coordinator that they interview in the documentary. And Spiro even says at one point that this was a different time for filmmaking than we have today. But even like, as you just mentioned, we still have, unfortunately, tragedies happening. But Spiro even says that the stunts they did in this movie were absolutely insane. And he says even thinking about them now gives him chills because he's like, he can't believe they pulled them off. And that's a testament to what we see on film in this, because going back to this assault scene, she is then drugged down at least 6 blocks with this car. And this is not the first time that we're going to have a crazy car stunt, because don't worry, Maniac Cop 3 throws everything at the wall to get it to stick, including amazing car chases, which we'll get to. But this car scene is absolute insanity, because she is handcuffed to this car and being dragged around while Maniac Cop dispatches Laurie and Landon. Luckily, they get her stopped, they get her safe. Davi saves the day and everything, and that's when they regroup. And that is when we then have this assault at this police station that starts with them at the shooting range. She's taken some test shots. She leaves, and 7 guys come in, and they do their firing on the range. And then all of a sudden from the range, Cordell wipes them all out one by one with each one shot each. And it is Squib City. And that is one thing that Lustig had said on this. And I think Larry Cohen said it too. It may have been Cohen. I can't remember. But basically, they had been reserved with Maniac Cop because they had an interest. They had a market. They didn't want to go crazy with it. It's Lustig. Lustig is the one who absolutely loves Maniac Cop 2, which makes sense because it's a swan song. He said that when it came to Maniac Cop, he did not hold back because of 3 times that budget, and they could do it, and they did it. So when this police station assault happens, Cordell is walking around with an automatic, I think it's a handgun, but I can't remember it. Like it's like an Uzi almost. And he is just blowing cops away, punching cops. He sends one cop with a punch through 3 barricades of woods in an office, like to where you keep seeing that. And the best thing about the police station assault is if you're bored of it, or if you want to see it again, don't worry. You get to see the whole thing again in Maniac Cop 3 because it is that impressive of a scene that they reused it. The same thing with this, with Maniac Cop 2 and Maniac Cop 1, which is a funny thing he brought up, Lustig did in the behind the scenes, is that the attack on Cordell we see in Maniac Cop 1. And then when Cordell tells the story to Turkel, they show you the exact same, again, edit from that movie with the theme, with the assault, because Cordell holds himself for a little bit in that shower assault, but then they cut him with razor blades, and it's the most brutal and vicious thing, and really hard to watch at times too. But again, they reuse footage in all 3 of these movies, including this amazing police station assault that is Squib City, and just mass carnage to where if you look away, you've probably missed 3 to 6 deaths.
Yeah, like I was surprised at the amount of firearm action there was in this movie. Like, then again, what's a cop supposed to use? Although, we'll say I didn't expect the chainsaw attempt when Mallory fought Cordell unsuccessfully off. I thought that was kind of a neat little touch there.
Well, and it's the absurdity, because Lustig said specifically that they were inspired with Maniac Cop of kung fu action films, and once you know that, you're like, oh my god, no, this totally makes sense that this is what. So you're talking the Jackie Chan movies, the Sonny Chiba, the John Woo, like they would go to 42nd Street and catch a movie. And then, they did that for their entire friendship, and then they wrote this together. And it's just like, oh my God, this totally makes sense as to where this absurdity comes from. And I could see Lustig being like, well, what if we did it this way, and having influence from one of those movies? It's comic book violence. And it's weird that you mentioned that. It's like the absurd level of the late 1980s, 90s violent DC comics, like
super carnage you'd see in like, I don't know, I'm trying to think. What's the most violent comic book I can think of from the time? Almost like early
Punisher.
Spawn.
I mean,
like,
it would be Punisher, or Spawn. Yeah.
And it's super ridiculous. And it's that sense of almost horror slapstick, but more serious, if that makes any kind of sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what also should be noted is, going back to the absurdity of it, the climax where we basically have Cordell and Turkle and Clarence Williams, the third character. I can't remember. Is Danny Trejo killed off really quick?
I think so.
I can't remember. I think he is, but he's also in the holding cell when Rossi has the visiting hours line. Danny Trejo's in there with Clarence Williams III and Leo Rossi. And the climax happens at Sing Sing. They've broken it at this point. They're trying to free more lunatics. And that's when Michael Lerner shows up and basically confesses the whole thing over a megaphone. And Cordell decides that, well, shit, I don't need to be Maniac Cop anymore because now I'm free. But just as he's about to, like, basically, you know, kind of turn over a new leaf, a convict comes out with a Molotov cocktail and sets him on fire. Now, I bring this up because Birdman already knows, but the Maniac Cop films are no stranger to Maniac Cop being on fire, which we will get to hardcore in part 3. But
yeah,
Cordell is then on fire and taking out the inmates that had attacked him, because he's back in Sing Sing. So the inmates that attacked him in the shower are in this prison at the same time. And he starts basically offing them as they came to him and tried to attack him once again. He's on fire the entire time. So Leo Rossi and Claudia Christensen, Susan Riley, she's been taken hostage by them at this point. They're all in Sing Sing. Cordell's on fire now. And they decide that at this point, Claudia Christensen's going to try to escape. And Turkle is like, well, you're not my friend. You never were my friend. Because essentially what you have to think of Turkle, and this is what Leo Rossi said in the behind the scenes, he's a white trash Igor.
Yeah,
and that makes
really
so much sense once you hear that, and once you hear him say that, you're like, oh god, no, that totally makes sense. So he decides to turn against his leader and he stabs Cordell in the back. Well, then, since he is on fire, Cordell grabs on to Leo Rossi, and Leo Rossi only agreed to do this fire stunt because Lustig had this idea. He said it would be super cool for him to grab onto you, and we cover your arm in flame retardant, we cover your arm in flame retardant, but we also light it, and it's going to go up your arm, and then that's the shot. Like, we just have that really close-up shot of your face, and everything's cool. And Leo Rossi's like, all right, yeah, I'll do it. Show me right now on yourself. So Lustig goes and gets set up, and they set his arm on fire, and everything goes well, and Rossi's like, well, shit, I didn't think you'd do it. All right, I'll do it. So they do it. He does the shot, and the whole time that he is Turkle, he has this incredible, like I said, Charles Manson beard, or actually, I can't remember if Manson had the beard or not. I think he had a goatee, but anyway, he has this really bushy beard. And so they do the stunt, everything's fine, and Rossi goes, oh, that was really cool. Goes up to feel his beard, and his beard is singed. Singed. So Cordell grabs on to Turkle. Turkle goes up in flames, and then he grabs onto him, takes him out a brick wall, and then we see the most incredible fall stunt while they're on fire together from the top of Sing Sing to the bottom of this bus. This bus then blows up as Cordell falls into it, and then that's basically the end of Maniac Cop. Robert Davi convinces Michael Lerner for them to give him all honors and everything back as Cordell. They have his funeral. They have him buried. And wouldn't you know it, Davi places Cordell's badge on top of the coffin. The two walk away, and then the end of Maniac Cop 2 is Cordell's fist punching through, grabbing the badge. And then, Birdman, we get what I can only describe as the most surprising element I've ever came across when watching the Maniac Cop films. The Maniac Cop rap.
Yeah, I was watching this half asleep, and I've got my headphones on where it looks like I'm wearing giant cat ears just to give you a visual.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting there, and I'm just kind of falling off. It's like 3:00 in the morning when I'm watching this, and I hear him like, is that fucking rap music? And it woke me right up, like literally full to attention. I'm like, I am not hearing this. So you're going to hear a sample of that at the end of this podcast.
I can give you some of my favorite lyrics just off memory, which is the opening, which is, you better watch out when you hear that sound. It means that the Maniac Cop's around. Once upon a time, he was a super cop, but the bad guy framed him to make him stop. They put him in prison where they tried to kill him. Now he broke up and he's the villain. Bullets don't hurt him. I know it sounds like jive, but we don't know if he's dead or alive. Set him on fire, shoot him with an Uzi, but he'll show up in your jacuzzi. You can run him over. You can feed him poison. Push him out a window and it only annoys him. You better believe me if you think I'm lying. When he shows up, people start dying. He's out for vengeance and he can't be stopped. That's why they call him the Maniac Cop. Yeah, I know that whole fucking verse.
My God, you are Ohio's favorite son.
That rap may or may not be something that I have listened to in my car several times out loud and rap the entire thing, because you don't expect it from this movie, because Maniac Cop only really has an instrumental with a couple songs that you hear like in the element of the Outside Streets and whatnot, but it's mainly an instrumental. Maniac Cop 2, same thing, except for, music inside the strip club and, a couple songs you hear on the radio. Then this rap song closes out Maniac Cop 2 that is credited to Jay Chataway, who does the score for both Maniac Cop and Maniac Cop 2.
And Star Trek.
And Star Trek. And he does that beautiful haunting lullaby in both of these. Like I said, you get your money out of that theme throughout the first two movies. But yeah, then the Maniac Cop rap was like a post-production decision, which, to give you an idea on post-production, they completed the film 6 weeks before a print was due.
Oh my
Lustig
God.
had 3 editors working on this movie from start to finish. So they were editing this as they went, kind of in the same way that I think Kevin Smith did with Red State when he shot that. And it was a huge success on video. New Line almost had it theatrically, but Live got it for the HBO rights. And I can't remember there's a company that put up $400,000 for the production of it because they wanted the video rights. And then the same thing was asked upon them for part 3 by Lustig, except he asked for $1 million because Maniac Cop 2 was such a hit because it was so insane. It was so out of its mind. It was a sequel. It was easy for video and all that stuff. He asked them for $1 million, and they said they almost did it, but they turned him down at the last second, which is also why there's budgetary issues in Maniac Cop 3, which we'll get to. But Maniac Cop 2 is absolutely what you want from a sequel. In my opinion, it is better than the original. I think it's a more entertaining film. It's easier to follow, and you just have one hell of a great action horror film under 90 minutes, which are all 3 of these films. Number 1 is like, I think Maniac Cop 1 is like 90 minutes on the nose. 2 is 88 and 3 is 85. You can't ask for more than that. Like these are exactly the perfect length for these movies. Coming out at a time too where people did have negative feelings on cops, even still as they do today, which is kind of why that title works. And that's why when you say like Maniac Cop 2 and Maniac Cop 3, it just rolls off the tongue so easily because, like you said, they were trying to set up a character while Matt Cordell isn't somebody that you see, kids trick-or-treating as or people doing cosplays as for the most part. He works as a villain, but then when we get to 3, is he? And again, we'll get there. But yeah, Maniac Cop 2 is my absolute favorite of these 3 films because it's so bonkers. It is so batshit. It is so entertaining. But everybody that is working on it is enjoying working on it. And that is exactly what they portrayed for the most part in the behind the scenes, minus the relationship between Claudia Christian and Lustig. They notoriously didn't get along well. Christian said that they shot this in Hoboken. It was 32 degrees. Her dressing room was a plastic sheet shower curtain that was in the back of this, billiards room or whatever. So like there was a lot of questionable things in regards of her experience and what she's noted in both her book and this documentary. But at the same time, everybody, especially Robert Zarr, especially Leo Rossi, Davi, Michael Lerner, all spoke so highly of this film and this production, and they're happy with it, and they had fun on it, and they're proud of it. And I think you can tell that when you watch this movie compared to the next one, which we'll get to.
Yeah, like Maniac Cop 2, I had more fun with it in a goofy popcorn sense. And it's not like I go into a horror movie expecting fucking Citizen Kane, but I got what I paid for.
Yeah.
That I can definitely say. So Maniac Cop 3, this one, I only know it because of the title. Because, again, it seems like one of those things that would seem like a throwaway gag on Simpsons or Family Guy. It's such a ridiculous title. It's Maniac Cop 3, Badge of Silence. I mean, it sounds like it should be called like Maniac Cop 3, The Reckoning, The Resurrection. It's so ridiculously goofy and over the top. You're like, all right, fine. It is what it is. Now, parts of this movie, again, not a huge fan of the whole, but what I mean by that is I love what they set up with Cordell and how he became what he is and the relationship that develops between him and another character and the ending to this movie, just the last 30 seconds, I really like. I'm thinking, you know what? In a weird way, that's kind of cute, and I kind of like that. So, Dave...
All right.
Infotain me.
So we are talking about Maniac Cop 3, Badge of Silence, 1992, directed by William Lustig and Joel Soeson, who Soeson was the producer and Lustig was the original director. But the movie, if you get the Blue Underground releases and any releases after, have it changed to Alan Smithy, which is a common pseudonym that directors use when they don't want their name on a film. It wasn't until the release of the Blu-ray that Lustig's name was taken off and replaced with Alan Smithy, to my knowledge of what he said in that documentary. This is AKA writer of a large influence in regards to everybody having a hand in this movie, but as far as IMDb goes, it is still credited to Larry Cohen, which I will explain in a little bit. But Maniac Cop 3 is a priest practicing voodoo decides that he's going to resurrect Matt Cordell. Cordell then takes his badge back and comes back to basically kill off cops. Like that is his aim, essentially. He wants to set things right. At the same time, he also is still kind of being a menace. Like, this one is very strange because Cordell isn't necessarily a monster in this as much as an Avenger. Or a Revenger, I guess is what you would call him. Mm-hmm. Because what happens in this movie is that you have this priest that brings him back. In doing so, he's back walking around the streets of New York, even though he had a happy ending in 2 and he really should have nothing to be mad at. In the time that is happening, a cop that is played by what is her name here? Caitlin Dunn. No, that's the doctor. Gretchen Becker. She is cop Katie Sullivan. The returning character of this film is Robert Davi. He is back as Detective Sergeant McKinney, and Katie Sullivan is a cop that's also on the force. She ends up getting killed by an ambush that occurs at this drug convenience store, and she goes on life support. And Maniac Cop decides that he wants to save her and bring her back as his bride. And that is the simplest terms that I can put into this because, my God, this movie has a lot going on, but also once you know the production story, it makes a lot of sense. Now, Birdman, as a special treat to you, I'm just going to give you a heads up that a part of the Blu-ray of Maniac Cop 3, which I just found out tonight, they have the original synopsis, which is 5 pages that I did screen cap that I can read if you would like of what this was supposed to be.
I am so curious.
Okay. So the original idea of Maniac Cop was done by Larry Cohen, but what you'll find out as I go into this in depth is that Maniac Cop 3 had major production issues with Lustig, who didn't really want to shoot much of a script, Larry Cohen, who hadn't delivered a script in like a month of them asking for it, and then wanted to dictate the script over the phone when they finally got a hold of him. He didn't want to write it. He wanted to tell them word for word what the script was going to be over the phone, and they were like, well, no, we're not going to do that. So how Maniac Cop 3 was pitched as Bride of Frankenstein with Maniac Cop. And that idea sounds fucking awesome, obviously.
Yeah.
Well, when Cohen didn't turn in the script, that's when they had to make changes. And I'll get into this a little bit more in depth. But here is the fascinating synopsis of what Maniac Cop 3 was supposed to be. And then we'll get into what we got. So, Larry Cohen's screenplay for Maniac Cop 3 went through numerous revisions before and during production of the film. The following synopsis was used by Overseas Film Group to sell the movie prior to the principal photography. It outlines Cohen's original story and concept for Maniac Cop 3, including characters and events not present in the final film. Police officer Teresa Mallory has been pursued by Cordell, so I'm going to stop for a second. Cohen says in the documentary of 2 that he did not want Laureen Landon's character, Teresa Mallory, to die. He wanted her to be paralyzed. He wanted her to be still alive, but she wasn't able to be in on the action because she was essentially going to be the bride of Maniac Cop. Once you know that and then know what happens in 3, again, it makes sense. It's from the reshoot. So going back to it, the Maniac Cop in a breathtaking car chase. Her tires are punctured. She rides on the rims, finally crashing her vehicle and encountering the Maniac Cop in hand-to-hand combat. Her neck is broken and Teresa is rushed to Mercy Hospital where surgeons manage to keep her alive, but she is brain dead and exists only on life support system. Elsewhere in the hospital in a locked-in ward, Dr. Susan Falcone, a nonsense physician, treats criminals who have been wounded during their apprehension. She patches them up so they can stand trial after saving the killers and rapists so that they can face execution afterwards. 2 seconds. Next page. Right. Passing Teresa Mallory's room one night, Susan looks in. She doesn't realize that she is not alone in the room. The comatose Teresa has a visitor lurking in the shadows whose mere presence causes her brain waves to go wild, stirred up by some unspeakable primal fear. Susan runs to get help, but when other doctors return with her, the brain waves on the monitor have ceased. No one believes Susan. Hospital officials decide to pull Teresa Mallory off her life support systems. That night, the medical office in charge is brutally murdered in the x-ray room, and a sadistic head nurse is similarly dispatched and stuffed down a laundry chute. A Haitian-born detective named Moon Jean is assigned to catch the killer. His childhood experiences with voodoo and the undead add a sharp edge to his basic cop instincts. When Detective Moon Jean arrives at the hospital to investigate the murders that took place there, Dr. Falcone confides that she glimpsed a huge policeman who vanished in the depths below the hospital. The following night, in the locked-in wing of the hospital, where the prisoners are kept pending their recovery, certain inmates awaken to find guns, ice picks, knives conveniently placed on their pillows or at their bedsides. The Maniac Cop is arming these vicious criminals who now slip out of their beds and limp or crawl their way toward the guards, killing some and taking others hostage. It appears that Dr. Falcone will be one of the victims, but Detective Moon Jean intervenes, saves her in a full-scale gun battle on the locked-in floor of the hospital. Moon Jean realizes that someone armed these criminals and probably wanted Susan Falcone to die. Final preparations are being made to pull Teresa Mallory off her life support when it is discovered that she is pregnant. She was not pregnant weeks ago when she entered the hospital. It is a scandal and an outrage, and a hulking male nurse is immediate suspect since he has a history of possible sexual abuse. The male nurse is found hanged in the morgue section of the hospital, and it is assumed that he took his own life rather than be arrested for the molestation of a patient. Shortly thereafter, the Maniac Cop appears, kills Teresa's attending physicians and nurses, and carries the body of the unconscious female off through the darkened hospital corridors. In a bizarre twist on the Sleeping Beauty fable, Cordell is the father of this child, and he intends that it be born. Are you following along? Because, my God, is this not fucking crazy?
This sounds so weird, but kind of would have been a cooler movie, I think.
Later that same night, Dr. Falcone is kidnapped from her home and brought to an abandoned church just opposite Mercy Hospital. Dr. Falcone's job is to keep Teresa alive until the child or whatever it is can be born. Detective Moon Jean finds Dr. Falcone and sleeping Teresa Mallory. He destroys Teresa's life support equipment, yanks the tubes out of Teresa's arm, and she finally stops breathing. Cordell returns in a fury and finds the mother of his unborn child has been allowed to die. He is like a tormented animal in his rage as he holds Teresa's limp body in his arms. She seems dead, but inside her a heartbeat continues, the heart of the infant. The Maniac Cop is still alive inside of her. Cordell stalks Detective Moon Jean and Susan Falcone through the old church, but before he can kill them, squads of police and SWAT units arrive outside the church. During the firefight that follows, Dr. Falcone and Moon Jean are stunned to see the figure of Teresa Mallory arise from the dead, just as Cordell comes back to life. The living thing inside her is refusing to let her die yet. Here we go. And the finale. Cordell and Teresa go on a rampage across the city, unkillable and unstoppable, with a single, all-consuming purpose to kill Falcone and Moonjean. They track our fleeing heroes to the edge of Manhattan and onto one of the constantly expanding landfills that turns garbage into additional landmass for the city. In the last-second act of desperation, Falcone and Moonjean activate the giant earth movers that send thousands of tons of rotting debris pouring down on Cordell and Teresa, burying them alive and turning them into prime Manhattan real estate. As tractors flatten out the land and a Catholic priest and voodoo shaman perform last rites, Moonjean isn't taking any chances. Soon thereafter, construction begins on a city housing project, which is the rise upon this landfill by the banks of the Hudson River. Some 8 months later, construction is nearly complete. A homeless woman finds an infant hidden in the rubble beside the construction site. It is naked, filthy child, only a few days old. She wraps the infant in a weathered blanket and carries it off into the city. Yes, Cordell and Teresa's child lives. Our story will continue. That is what Maniac Cop 3 was supposed to be.
That would have been really cool to see, actually.
It's very interesting, and that's why I think in regards to what we have on film makes a lot more sense when you find out that the reason that Moonjean didn't happen was because Lustig couldn't sell a black male character to a Japanese market, so the investor money was not there for that. Robert Davi was able to come back, and his character was very well liked, so they were like, well, okay, we'll make that change. So essentially what happens in Maniac Cop 3 is that the opening is the shaman bringing Cordell back to life, and then that's when we meet Davi and Katie Sullivan. Sullivan then is called to this drugstore where we have Jackie Earle Haley, yes, the Freddy remake Freddy himself, and Rorschach, and the terrible kid in Bad News Bear. I love Jackie Earle Haley, by the way. He's really great in The Retirement Plan, the new Nicolas Cage movie that came out a month back or so. But he is drugged out of his mind, taking up this convenience store by gunpoint, shooting cops, and they're trying to basically stop it. And he is in the back now of this convenience room as Katie arrives on the scene, and she's shot, but he hasn't hurt her. So she decides that she's going to slip in through the roof. Well, while that's happening, this really sleazy news team arrives on the scene and starts recording. And she goes to the skylight, goes through the skylight, lands into the the pharmacy section of this convenience store. And Jackie Earle Haley takes this chick hostage, and he's like, you'll shoot me, but you'll shoot her too. Before doing this, he's also taken every drug that he can find in the fucking pharmacy. Like, he's injecting things into him. He's taking pills. He's smacked out of his mind where he looks like a pirate with the headband he has on. It's kind of hilarious and great that he's also in this role, because this is not the only time we have him in this movie, which we'll get into. So anyway, what happens next is that she ends up shooting Jackie Earle Haley, and she thinks that he's dead, not realizing that the chick he'd taken hostage was his girlfriend who let him into the back room of the pharmacy. She shoots Katie. Katie shoots her, but she gets like 3 good shots off into Katie, while Katie gets 2 good shots off into Jackie Earle Haley and the chick. So Katie is now in a coma, and it's not looking good. And Davi rushes to the hospital, and they decide that they're going to put her on life support. And what's interesting about Cohen's original concept to the movie that we got, the life support battle is there, but it's pretty much concluded to the hospital only. That is the only section where a lot of these kills take place, which means that Cordell can use an X-ray machine to kill Robert Forster, or can use paddles to kill Doug Savant, the Dick in Trick or Treat, the heavy metal horror film, and Desperate Housewives I know him from. I mean, the dude, he plays a slimeball well, and he's the main OR surgeon that's working on her in this movie that gets it with these paddles on this roof. And I think you can agree with me that the action in this, again, is over the top, but also way more hilarious in regards of how he's dispatching people.
I see. Was this one the one where he does the clay shoot, where he throws the guy up in the air and shoots him a shit ton of times? Or is
this
that
is
Maniac
the skeet
Cop
shooting?
2?
No.
Yeah,
Because that guy is standing out the hospital, and he's like, that woman cop deserved it. So yeah, fucking Cordell picks up this guy that's just talking shit to him on the street, because Cordell is basically stalking Katie this entire film, until he gets her at the end and tries to resurrect her. But anyway, he's stalking her outside this hospital. This guy comes up and he's like, yeah, cop deserved it, blah, blah, blah. Pisses Cordell off. He turns around, grabs the guy, throws him in the air, and then shoots him 4 times before he hits the ground like skeet shooting. Yeah,
It was so fucking ridiculous. I was like, what?
You've got that kill. You've got, like I said, the X-ray machine, the paddles. You have the kill with the news team, which we don't really see except for the fact that he is really using that blade like a samurai sword in this movie, like even sheaths it as such at one point where he almost like holds it over his head and puts it back into the freaking baton holder. Like, Cordell is a madman in this movie, but he's killing people that deserve it, which I know is really weird to say, but it's like, for the most part, I mean, I'm not saying he's completely not killing innocents. He's killing innocents in this. But he's avenging anybody that fucks with Katie's life support or anybody that, like, does anything that makes her stay less comfortable at this hospital. And in doing so, Davi is completely worked over from the events of part 2. He's lost Laurie Landon's character, and, you know, now Katie's on life support, and he's trying to figure out why the hell Cordell is back. And he tracks down the voodoo shaman, and he's like, you know, what the fuck did you do? And he's like, well, Cordell has unfinished business. And that's when they play in this whole thing of the bride. So what happens from Cohen's script into this movie is that the bride thing occurs only when we have the lunatics take over the asylum, which is where Jackie Earle Haley is given a gun, he's uncuffed, and he frees 2 other people who then kill Paul Gleason. Yes, kids, Paul Gleason from The Breakfast Club, Trading Places, Die Hard. The list goes on of the people that are in this movie. Kills him, and then kills his lawyer. They sneak out. Meanwhile, Maniac Cop can grab Katie's body, take her back to the shaman. Meanwhile, Robert Davi, back at the hospital, rolls up in a stretcher with a gown over him, rolls up to Jackie Earle Haley character with his 2 goons, kicks the sheet up, guns them down in a blaze of glory, and then follows Jackie Earle Haley into the bathroom where he also gives him a final shot. This is a straight-up action movie. There's a siege on the hospital. We see the siege on the police station. And then, I mean, my God, this next part. So I was watching this with Henrik. This has been some years ago. It was me, him, and his girlfriend at the time, and we had done a marathon that day that was all 3 Reanimators and all 3 Maniac Cops back to back. So we did Reanimator, Bride of Reanimator, Beyond Reanimator, went into Maniac Cop 2, Maniac Cop 3, Badge of Silence. And we saved the Maniac Cop series for last because we knew those would completely carry us through because of how insane they are, especially the ending climax of Maniac Cop 3, which at this point, Maniac Cop has taken Katie's body to the shaman. The shaman says, I can't bring her back. Davi and Susan Fowler, the psychiatrist, have, or the doctor, have swarmed or have gone into this building where the shaman is and where the Maniac Cop is, and they end up getting into a gunfight. And something happens to where a fire starts that burns Katie's corpse, to where Matt Cordell then picks it up. And Birdman, in my notes, specifically, I have at 1:09 or 1 hour, 9 minutes and 26 seconds, he is on fire. And the reason I bring this up is because he is on fire at this point. He walks out and Davi walks out. He says, you know, rest in peace, Katie. They think they beat Maniac Cop. They put the doctor into an ambulance. They drive her back. And then not even 2 minutes later, a fire blazing Matt Cordell in a cop car with the doors missing pulls up next to them, and they have a car chase where, I shit you not, he is on fire the entire time. And when I say the entire time, I say, again, 1 hour and 9 minutes, 26 seconds, he's on fire. 1 minute, 17 seconds, 39, or 17 minutes, 39 seconds, he blows up and is still on fire. It is not until an hour and 20 minutes that he is charred up and no longer on fire. So that means for almost the last 20 minutes of this movie, this man is on fire, or the last 15 minutes, this man is on fire. And this car chase, the whole time, he's on fire.
Yeah, like, that's one thing I gotta give Maniac Cop 3. This fire stunt and even the car chase, that's some really well done stunt work. And that's a really long burn.
That's Spiro. Spiro talked about it in the bonus that they threw everything that Lustig brought to them at the wall and did what they could with it. And that fire stunt was pulled off by the fact that they basically made it like a race car, to where what we would normally have the driving wheel on the right side of the vehicle was the passenger side, and that's where the actual driving was done so that he could simulate. But the guy was on fire. They had a box around the passenger driving the car with extinguishers on either side of him ready to go, and they each had panic buttons, not to mention they're trailing behind him with extinguishers ready to, if the car starts going or if he start burning, they've got extinguishers following them while they're shooting. They've got extinguishers in the car. The driver is the passenger driver is protected, and they are literally setting somebody on fire to drive this car. But in some shots, they did use a dummy, which created a hilarious and also terrifying story where they lit the dummy on fire. Its foot slipped onto the gas. The car takes off with the dummy driving down a freaking 2-block street, crashes into a propane tank, and somehow did not go off.
Oh my gosh, that is literal movie making insanity.
And I mean, that is exactly what we have in Maniac Cop 3, which it carries over from Maniac Cop 2. But going back to the production issues, so Lustig decided to do Maniac Cop 3 because he was offered it after doing a movie post Maniac Cop 2, and he kind of reluctantly took it because he was like, I kind of wanted to do something else, but since they're offering it, $2 million less than the original budget, so we already have budget restrictions. But apparently, Lustig is a guy that once he has a vision and once he has a baby, he will drown it in the bathwater to get what he wants. And what I mean by that is he was just cashing checks. He was just doing what he wanted to do for the sake of it, which is why when they turned in his rough cut, Lustig's original rough cut, the film was 51 minutes long. And was predominantly action sequences only with very little story. So that's when Joel Sosin came to him and said, well, Bill, we can't turn this in. This is 51 minutes. Like our agreement says like at least a 90-minute minimum for theatrical. We have to shoot some filler. And a great example is, the opening scene of Davi and Gretchen Baker's character on the range, which is a really good scene because you get a side of Gretchen because she is essentially female Cordell, which I neglected. She's up with the Internal Affairs Board because she's apparently getting too rough. She got too rough with a rapist or something like that. And she is being reviewed, but she's on the range kicking ass, and it's her birthday, and Davi and her friends creates a really good link to their friendship in just one scene. And apparently Lustig scoffed at that because going back to Cohen wanting to do the whole script thing, they got his script eventually, and it was okay, but there was a lot of missing pieces. So Sosin himself took it upon him to go ahead and take it and bring it up, and that's when he had that rain scene and all this stuff. Anything he took to Lustig was completely not going for. Like, he just did not want to do it. So eventually, Lustig ended up walking away from the project. He was no longer the director, which is why Sosin stepped in to fill in, and that's why we have such a let's try this, let's try this action horror film sequel of Maniac Cop 3 is because you had a lot of cooks in the kitchen just giving their own idea. And it makes a lot of sense too with the fact that we get to see the entire siege on the jail again from part 2. We get to see the go back to Cordell going into the prison at the end of part 2 with the fire stunt. Anything action that they could carry over from 2, do it in 3 and repeat shots because of that. But that's not to say that you don't have this amazing, incredible, insane fucking stunt at this climax that involves a guy on fire driving a car that, oh my God, surprise, crashes and blows up even bigger than we would expect it to. I mean,
yeah, like
it all adds up.
Like the fact that stunt concludes because they stuck an oxygen tank in the back of his cruiser.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, I like that. That's a clever way to get the final kill. And then when Davi walks over, takes Cordell's severed arm and lights a cigarette.
What a boss move. My God, man.
That was like the icing on this ridiculous, insane cake. But like ultimately, I mean, Maniac Cop 3, it's got some really interesting things going for it. I love the voodoo angle.
The
and
atmosphere.
the one
The atmosphere of it with this voodoo, not only does the score get affected because you have an incredible score by Joel Goldsmith, which I think is honestly too good for this movie, being Maniac Cop 3, but his score is so good because you've got like that omen sound of like the choir calling out, but also those creepy deep notes. But then you have this voodoo setting that makes it more of a horror film, but at the same time, the only scenes you get of that are few and far between with all the gunplay mixed in. But yeah, I absolutely agree. The voodoo essence of this really works.
Yeah, like the thing that I really liked about this is where the voodoo priest says her soul's unwilling to come back.
Yes.
And I'm thinking that's a supernatural element I wish was explored just a little bit more. Like, that's the part about this movie I like the most. I love, like, it's not in it for very long, but when it is, it's super, super effective, and I honestly kind of dug it.
Well, and I appreciate what they got out of what they had. Again, going back to the dialogue, that, you know, I don't know who wrote it per se. I mean, it does have Coen vibes to it, especially, but like you got the one scene of Davi meeting Doug Savant's character, it's Savant, where he's like, you know her religion, and he's like Catholic, and he's like, oh, get a priest. Like there's those quips in there, like the same thing with Life's a Bitch, huh? And then that cameraman still like straight up dies. Like he finds this kid who's just lost his sister in like a tragic shooting with a shotgun. And he finds out that he's talking to the brother of her, and he's like, yeah, life's a bitch, huh, kid? And then moments later is killed by Maniac Cop. Like, everybody punches their own tickets in this movie with their lines. Like, you got Paul Gleason's character that Robert Forster's the doctor that can sign off on them pulling Katie Sullivan's life support, and he's like, yeah, I'll do it. I could do it today. He's like, but my family's coming in and they're real Knicks fans. And Paul Gleason's like, oh, I can get you on the court seats. And then literally 2 minutes later, he's being shoved under an X-ray machine and getting fried. Paul Gleason gets taken out with Jackie Earle Haley's lawyer right after they're talking about the film rights and all this stuff. Like, everybody in this movie punches their own ticket with this dialogue, but the dialogue works for this movie with the film that we got, because it's a mess. It is an absolute mess. They use footage from the other films, but going back to what we talked about last week, Bordello of Blood, despite everything that happened production-wise, despite all the troubles that occurred on this movie, despite the financial issues that they had to endow with the fact of Lustig going over budget and them only having a 51-minute work print, we have Maniac Cop 3, and we have a really fucking good release of Maniac Cop 3, mind you, as well. And these movies, for me especially, with Maniac Cop 3, I was like, damn, like, I could throw this on at any time. Like, this is just a fun one, because you get pieces of 2 and 1 also. But the overall idea of Cordell, even though the first movie, he's a straight-up psychopath that's come back for revenge. Second movie, the same thing, except that, you know, he wants to be redeemed for everything that occurred to him with the corrupt system. And then 3, he's trying to protect this woman that he wants to be his bride. And then when he doesn't get that, he's like, all right, well, I'm going to kill all you fuckers. And then is still alive at the end. Like, it's that comfort blanket of slasher film, but also, like I said, this is so late in the slasher era, it's just funny. But Maniac Cop 3 is, again, that I'm glad we have it, and because of the fact we have it, I appreciate it and love it, especially finding out all the history and everything with it.
I wish I had the same level of love for this movie as you do, but I can appreciate from a storytelling perspective all the neat components that come together. And like you said, this comes at the tail end of the slashers in the 90s, when things were very clearly starting to change in the direct-to-video market. This is before Scream had happened.
Yeah, 4 years before we get Scream.
So, like, horror was trying to pivot away from monsters. It was trying to get a little bit smarter. The meta thing had happened, but not super widespread. And, you know, horror was in a very strange place. Like, the only monsters that were around that I can think of, like, yeah, you did have Chucky was still being made at this time. and you had a couple of low budget monster movies, but this one knew exactly what it was, despite how friggin' weird it was, and it was unapologetic about it. So,
well, and it also comes at a time. I mean, like, you go back to Maniac Cop 1 is 88, Maniac Cop 2 is 90, Maniac Cop 3 is 92. This is at a time when people still didn't trust police. So the concept of joining around Maniac Cop was an easy concept to pitch. And I think, honestly, that's why these films are even more relevant now than they probably ever have been. And Maniac Cop 1, 2, and 3 are all available on Freevee and Pluto and everything. So these films are pretty available for the most part. But again, going back to the behind the scenes, like once you know that stuff and know why we got 2 and why we got 3 and why 3 turned out this way, I just have such an appreciation of film that I can see the good in the bad. Like I can find the turd, I can shine the turd just enough to be able to enjoy it. But I think personally, from just revisiting these 3 in the last 24 hours, I think the Maniac Cop series is a lot of fun. I think it's topical. I think it's not what you expect in regards of the sequels especially, but they're all watchable. I was never bored with either of these movies personally, except for the middle of 1, which I think meanders a bit. But Maniac Cop 3 especially, yeah, it is a construction of a film with too many cooks in the kitchen, but they had to do what they had to do. And the fact that they got a film that can separate itself from the other two pretty distinguishingly, especially with that chase that I cannot stop talking about, because the best thing that I can describe that as, Birdman, is when we watched that with Henrik's girlfriend at the time. Henrik and I had both seen Maniac Cop 3 a couple times at that point, and we both always joked about the port wheels on fire. So that whole thing of me saying, at 1 minute and 9 seconds, or 1 hour and 9 minutes, he's still on fire. He did that with his girlfriend. He's like, now I would like to point out, at this point, Maniac Cop is on fire. You see he's on fire, right? And we're all like, yeah, we see. And then when he pulled up in the car, and the car's just still going, he's like, I would like to point out that it has been it's been like 5 minutes and 37 seconds, and Maniac Cop is still on fire.
My God.
I have the personal memories with that, but also I think the Maniac Cop films, like I said, are topical right now, but they're still entertaining. And above all else, they are a time capsule of what sequels were like in that late 80s to early 90s. This is exactly the kind of same thing you expect from the Sleepaway Camp sequels. Stuff like that makes a lot of sense once you know where the market was for the video, and also where the stories were that were coming out and the productions and everything behind them. They're violent, they're funny, they're weird, and above all else, they are movies that I will probably watch until the day I die.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that did come out of this, there was supposed to be a television series that was optioned back in 2019.
Yeah.
And as of this recording, it is still being worked on in some capacity. I think
pre-production. I mean, the strikes definitely didn't help it, but Nicholas Winding Refn is going to apparently be at the helm, which is hilarious you bring that up, because Lustig says that in the 2013 documentary for the release of Maniac Cop 3.
Yeah,
so they've been working on this a while.
I mean, I would like to see this actually get developed into a television series. I could actually see this being a really cool television series if it was done properly. I really think it could work. Like the idea of corruption, police brutality, Maniac Cop being brought back through either a combination of voodoo, dark magic, or just, I don't know, maybe the social consciousness of the masses resurrects an angel of vengeance, so to speak. I could see this working. I really could. Now, unfortunately, Robert Z'Dar passed away back in 2015, so we wouldn't be able to have him. Larry Cohen passed away within the last couple of years.
Yep.
So a lot of the original people have unfortunately passed, but the surviving cast members, definitely you could do some kind of a cameo. As long as the original stories are there or ideas, like I would love to see Tom Atkins do something.
I wouldn't be surprised to see the TV series be almost like a whodunit kind of anthology, or not anthology, a whodunit multi-length story series. But at the same time, I feel like with what's going on in today's climate, with everything, with police and general justice practices that we have here in the States as well as you guys have over there, I think it's so topical now of a story, but also one you have to be super careful with because it's delicate content unless you go the route of absolute absurdity, which is what they did with these first three.
Yeah, like I think you could tell a serious story, but you would need to bring someone over from the realm of the police procedural or someone who has a significant law enforcement background to make it really interesting. I mean, you just don't want to paint all cops as bastards. You don't want to paint them all as superheroes either. So you have to find a way to tell a difference between the Punisher and Law and Order SVU, if that makes any kind of sense.
And you have to distinguish your Maniac Cops because, your Maniac Cop in the first one, he's trying to basically get revenge on the people that fucked him over. The second one, he's trying to get his comeuppance for everything that has been done to him and also try to figure out, who can help him. And then the third one, like I said, he's just a protector, revenger, whatever you want to call it. It's that same thing. It's like you have to be able to distinguish those, which is why also I find the series kind of fascinating because Cordell's motivation changes with each movie, essentially.
Yeah. So are these movies worth going out there and checking out? Yes, but only
Absolutely.
because they are so available. Yeah. Right now, you can stream them across any number of services. While my enjoyment wasn't to the same level as Dave's, I'm glad I sat down and watched them and got a chance to experience some fantastic stunts, some interesting writing, some cool characters, some actors doing stuff that was against type, and I got exposed to some different films of Larry Cohen because I'd only really seen The Stuff. So this was something really, really, really fun, and I'm glad we decided to do this. So me and Dave, we were talking off air, and we're going to continue to do these. Now you're going to hear Aaron back, you're going to hear Alex back. We found a time that works for all of us. So I'm going to run it past the boys and we'll get them involved. I know we're doing a lot of cool things in the month of November as we lead up to our annual Twig Holiday Gift Guide, which will be airing on December 9th. That should be one of our last shows of the year, which will take us out to, we are going to return. Me and Alex have finally settled on a date. The first Twig live show of the new year of 2024 will be on January 22nd. That is a Monday. We will be working on stuff during the break. You're going to hear some botched rolls, which is going to be the role play show. I'll talk about different types of role playing games and some of the lore and some of the books and stuff like that. And this actually just came across our desk today. Our friend and colleague, Steve Megatron Phillips of the Geekcast Radio Network, is deciding to take a podcast of his own and sort of do something a little bit different. Future Imperfect began as a Twig project collaboration between our two kind of websites. And Steve has decided he wants to take his co-host, Mike Blanchard, through Star Trek exclusively while me and Aaron and Alex talk about wider sci-fi properties in addition to Star Trek. So Future Imperfect is continuing on ThisWeekInGeek.net, but Altered Trek is going to be the new show that Steve and Mike are going to be embarking on. So they'll be leaving Starbase whatever in January of 2024. You can find out more about that on geekcastradio.com. So if you want to hear Steve, who's a Star Trek expert, talk about bringing a new perspective and a new viewer into the Star Trek world, you can go over to Geekcast Radio. We will support them here at ThisWeekInGeek.net as Mike and Steve go through episodes of TNG, Voyager, DS9, the original series, and whatever else they want to talk about. And obviously us here at This Week in Geek and Future Imperfect will continue to talk about sci-fi franchises, Star Trek included, but it could be Battlestar Galactica, Babylon 5, Sliders. You don't goddamn know what you're going to get on this show. But it has been a fantastic time. Again, thank you, Dave, for joining us here on the show. I look forward to hearing more stuff that you have on Welcome to Primetime. I know Enrique is working so hard right now, literally as we record this podcast.
Absolutely.
He's finishing up He's finishing up the last couple stories of Weekly Spookies, and he's worked so hard over the last 31 days. I have a story that'll be coming out, I think, in the next couple of days, and Enrique's a real champ for taking a chance on me, so I appreciate this guy so much. And obviously, we're going to be looking forward to more Welcome to Primetime. I'm actually in the middle of writing an email to you guys. I'm going to pitch you something when we get off air.
Okay.
So anyway, guys, that's going to do it for us. So for This Week in Geek's Loose Cannon, we have been
David Denoyer.
I've been Mike the Birdman saying, be kind, rewind. We'll catch you guys again next time, right here on ThisWeekInGeek.net.
You better watch out when you hear that sound. It means that the Maniac Cop's around. Once upon a time, he was a super cop, but the bad guys framed him to make him stop. They put him in prison where they tried to kill him. But he broke out, now he's the villain. Bullets won't hurt him. I know it sounds like jive, but when I show if he's dead or alive.
Set him on fire, I shoot him with an Uzi. But he'll show up in your jacuzzi. You can run him over, you can feed him poison. Push him out a window and it only annoys him. You better believe me if they think I'm lying. When he show up, people start dying. He's out for vengeance and he can't be stopped. That's why they call him the Maniac Cop.
You have the right to remain silent.
Are either one of these any good? Sir?
What?
Are either one of these any good?
I don't watch movies.
Quick, change the channel.
You're wasting your life making shit! Nobody cares! These movies are terrible!
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.